This is Closereads.
A philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. We are completing some old business in that we had... separate section on law, which is the Summa Theologica 1A, 2AE, question 90, the essence of law, which we ended up not doing as a group on the Partially Examined Life, partially because I think the PDF that we were using of the collected works or selected philosophical works cut off the end of it, and we thought maybe, in fact, there was much more, but it's just, this is 4 questions is all. Of course, in the strange Aquinas ordering of the presentation of information, and I happen to find trying to find in a PDF that was not cut off a version that had commentary on it by Duns Scotus. Have you ever had to do any Duns Scotus, Wes?
No, but I think we should do them ultimately for PEL.
So Duns Scotus is another one of these Middle Ages philosopher guys. This is, I'm not sure exactly when he would have written this commentary. I see he lived from 1265 to 1308. And I believe I'd have to get my appropriate notes out from our episode on the Aquinas.
Yeah, sounds like he's a contemporary of Aquinas.
So 1268. So he's like the next generation or so responding to this. I mean, of course, Aquinas was, massively influential for hundreds of years. So, but we're not too considered this. I'm looking at the wiki page for Duns Scotus, among the most important philosopher theologians in Western Christendom during the last part of the medieval period, with Thomas Aquinas, Bonaventure, and William of Ockham. So I didn't know that I don't know that Seth will let us do anything else from this period.
Yeah.
He seems to be very disgusted. Known for the univocity of being, the idea that existence is the most abstract concept we have, applicable to everything exists. Well, when I was looking through this before, I saw, at least this wiki characterizes some of what we were saying. Aquinas's comments about the features of God that we can only apply analogically to God, where we apply them literally to people. So people literally love other people. Does God literally love anything? Well, God is not the kind of being that can actually love in a way that we would understand, but he does something that metaphysically is comparable to love. So it's okay to use that word. Duns Scotus apparently is somebody that is pushing back against that and saying, no, you could literally apply these adjectives to God. He's also a voluntarist. So some of this stuff that we've talked about of the determinism in Aquinas, I think Scotus is pushing against. So law was interesting to me in that it seems the most foreign to the Aristotelian stuff that Aquinas is so excited about, right? That when we read our Ellis on essentialism, Ellis was sort of following the Aquinas that the necessary properties of things are right there in the things. They're not in some sort of external law, God having a plan, a blueprint that then gets, the creatures on the earth obey. But if you want to have an idea of divine law, that God makes every molecule do what it does, and God commands, maybe doesn't make human beings do what they do, but at least gives them options and invites them to, so they want to have some sort of continuity between descriptive laws of science and normative laws of ethics, is my understanding for this time period. Very, very foreign to Aristotle. So you didn't even take a look at this stuff when we did the Aquinas, right? It was sort of assigned, but then Not assigned. I had read the beginning of the first couple questions at least.
Yeah, no, I haven't looked at it. Um, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, let's go and let's try to do it in order this time. And so we have objection one, and then we can discuss it, and then let's just see what Scotus has to say about objection one, because this is a, you know, people can look at the PDF I've linked you to, and there's one column that's Aquinas and one column that's Scotus, and eventually, at least in some parts, well, what Scotus has to say is much longer, and so it takes over the whole page.
Okay. Um, sorry. Whether law is something pertaining to reason. Article 1. Objection 1. It would seem that law is not something pertaining to reason, for the apostle says, I see another law in my members, etc., but nothing pertaining to reason is in the members, since the reason does not make use of a bodily organ. Therefore, law is not something pertaining to reason. Um, and then, do you want me to read the Scotus?
Well, let's so right off the bat, right, we're trying to get to the point of, is law like scientific description, which of course applies to everything. And so you could say that there's a separate law within my limbs than is in the rest of my body, or is in the physics of the rocks and the biology of the trees and things like this. Clearly, nothing to do with human reason. But it would be strange to have an idea that there's a logos in everything. But it, I was going to say, but most especially in the human mind, right? We explicitly use reason, so you would have to have an idea, very contra to the Ellis thing that I was describing, that all reason is in either human minds or God's mind, and everything else is just obeying. There is no logos within it. It is all imposed upon it.
Um, do you want to? Are we going to look at
I mean, let's see if
the
we can see if Scotus
replies
has.
one by one? Sorry, you want to look at the Scotus, and then and then maybe we should look at the replies one by one as well. Um, because if we do in completely in order, then we're going to have to come back all the way up to the objection and then reread the
Right.
objection.
Let's just try it in order this time. I know we did it out of order the last time, but just to, we'll remind ourselves. We'll take it as he's presenting it.
Okay. I mean, I think some of these are. It's clear what these objections mean when you look at the reply, because it can be vague. But
Oh, well, let's read the Scotus first, and then.
all right, and then we could maybe try the reply on this one, and then
Sure.
try it without on the second and see how it goes.
Okay.
All right. So Scotus says, it seems that law is something of reason, for it pertains to law itself to prescribe and prohibit. But to command belongs to reason, for reason shows and dictates what needs to have been done. Therefore, law is something of reason. So he's already articulating the counter argument here.
I don't know exactly what Scotus is doing here. Yeah, we have to kind of figure out, because there's no introduction here. Is Scotus giving a commentary on this? Is Scotus replying to it, giving his own reply? Is he just trying to make it more understandable what Aquinas is saying?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think part of what he's doing is he's probably reading these objections according to the point that they're trying to make, which is the opposite, right? So
Yes.
he's reading the tea leaves here and trying to say, okay, yeah, the implication is that there is something of reason in law. Um, and the way it sounded like you interpreted objection one is saying something like, right, reason is the way we, um, what is it? I see another law in my members. but nothing pertaining to reason is in the members. You're reading it as about determinism and freedom, right? Um,
Well, or about the relation between uh, where is the logos, and is it just in minds or can it be in everything?
I mean, so the law is something that compels us, and at the level of natural law, that right, that seems to preclude us doing anything because we have reasons. We just do things because we're compelled to do it by natural law. Um,
Right.
on the
So
other
your
hand, as
members are just
yeah,
compelled to do it by natural law, but they don't have reason.
yeah, yeah. So, um, so yeah, maybe that's a good way you
So
put it with logos, where the
Scotus is
logos
giving his
is.
own reply. It seems law is something of reason, for it pertains to law to prescribe and prohibit, but to command belongs to reason. Uh, right. And so prescribing and prohibiting is commanding, right? Or a species of commands. Reason shows what needs to have been done. Therefore, law is something of reason. So if something is if we're doing a science experiment and we're stacking rocks on each other, or whatever the thing is, uh, and the we note the behavior. If there's necessity, right? If when you drop something it always falls, then on some level something is showing that it needs to be done. So reason, even though obviously the rock is not thinking I need to go down, but reason must be involved in any instance of necessity.
Right. Um, the way rationality is manifested in the fact that things are law like in their behavior. Um, I think what's probably at issue here is this paradox that we're very familiar with, which is that freedom is supposed to come from reasoning about things, deliberating about things, and then coming to a decision. But in a way, we're compelled by reasons. So if we're compelled by the reasons that we reason about, then how is that a basis of for um for freedom? It's not directly the issue here, but it seems to be behind this a little bit.
Yes.
Um, so I don't know. Should we check out the reply?
So yes, we're going to try read the reply, and if it doesn't make sense to us, then we're not going to use this strategy.
Yeah,
So
yeah. If it or even if it's just not that helpful,
yeah,
because yeah. So because what's intervening is his considered position stated. But anyway, since law is a kind of rule and measure, it may be in something in two ways. First is that in that which measures and rules. And since this is proper to reason, it follows that in this way, law is the reason alone. Secondly, as that which is measured and ruled. In this way, law is in all those things that are inclined to something by reason of some law, so that any inclination arising from a law may be called a law, not essentially, but by participation, as it were. And thus, the inclination of the members to concupiscence is called the law of the members. So, our body, um, right, has, so desire is part of our members. It's a part of our physicality to be desiring beings, and we're pushed in this way and that. And so someone might say, well, desire isn't a law because desire is not rational. You're being irrational when you desire something. So Aquinas is trying to tell us, yes, but the from the naturalistic point of view, I discover rational scientific principles that can describe the way my desire works. So there's reason from the first person point of view where I'm reasoning about things and coming to conclusions, and then there's reason from this third person point of view where I'm doing natural science.
and that is going to be compatible with the religious point of view that he's presenting because God, because of a sort of theodicy that God always does something for a reason. God has the logos has coherence within him. So by trying to do good science, and I think this is probably the way Newton or somebody thought of things as well. I'm not totally sure, but that you are by investigating the most rational way that an ideally rational being would have thought through something is the same project to just figuring out how organized nature is.
Hmm. All right, you want to do objection 2?
Okay. Further, in the reason there is nothing else but power, habit, and act. So this is supposed to be against the idea that law is pertaining to reason. In the reason there is nothing else but power, habit, and act, but law is not the power itself of reason. In like manner, neither is it a habit of reason, because the habits of reason are the intellectual virtues of which we've spoken above. Nor again is it an act of reason. Is it an act of reason? Because then law would cease when the act of reason ceases, for instance, while we are asleep. Therefore, law is nothing pertaining to reason. So at least the last one is very easy to understand, right? If you think law is reason, then, well, you're not reasoning when you're asleep. So in other words, is it reasoning like a human being is doing in their head?
Yeah. And then Scotus, do you want to read that one?
Okay, so Scotus's response to that, according to the philosopher, Ethics 1, last chapter, in other words, Aristotle, the appetite obeys reason. Therefore, the will obeys the commands of reason. Therefore, it is the job of reason itself to command and to pass laws that are to be kept in the republic.
Okay, that's
That seems like he's
confusing.
talking about a different thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was the challenge of this whole topic is law could be the logos, the orderliness of things, or it
Hmm.
could be the guiding principle in ethics, and therefore the guiding principle in uh, a well-run state.
Yeah, could be something like natural law and ethics. What ought we to do? So we have two, just for listeners to remind them, we have two conceptions of law. One is natural law, the laws according to which objects are compelled to behave, and then one is the um,
Positive law
yeah,
is
positive law.
a technical term. Laws people
Well,
pass,
natural,
or
the distinction between, yeah, so it's is getting confusing now because there's natural law in the political sense, which is supposed to be what's what's according to nature, and then positive law can accord with that or not accord with that. That's man's law. It's positive law.
mm-hmm.
But then there's the naturalistic laws of the way matter and force and energy behave in nature. So there's Kantian law of right. So the what's right to do, what's ethical is a law given to oneself. So all these things are kind of at play here. But the main thing is we have two broad categories, which is scientific law versus ethical law.
Yes, descriptive and
Um,
normative, and the natural law that you were talking about. That probably comes from Aristotle, but is well, I'm not sure if it comes from Aristotle, but it is definitely used by Hobbes and folks like that. Is some bastardization of the descriptive and the normative. It's a teleological notion. This is why I said it came from Aristotle, even though I'm not totally sure about that. If you can find that phrase in him, but if a acorn is supposed to grow into an oak tree, then it naturally does this. It is a natural law that it do this, and so a human being is supposed to use its reason and control itself. And so that is what the natural law says. But of course, human beings don't obey the natural law because we have free will, because we have options, because we have we succumb to our animal nature. But if we were living fully as human, then we would obey this natural law that says this is what humans are like.
yeah, there are these objective norms that are based on our constitution, how we're constituted. as human beings, what kind of animals we are, and all that. People can listen to our Philippa Foot episode for defense of that kind of point of view. Do you want to? So,
Well,
what do we
I
want to?
want to I want
Yeah,
to think a little bit more about this objection to as Aquinas gives it. I think he's trying to give just an interpretation of Aristotle that would rule this out, um, right? But law is not the power of reason itself. In reason, there is nothing else but power, habit, and act.
power meaning potentiality.
Right, right. In the reason, so why is how in the reason is there potentiality? I forget what this, like we talked about habit. Virtues are habits. Okay, and virtues are
Well,
also
it's like a
potentials.
disposition.
Mm-hmm.
The power, the potentiality is a dispositional thing. So there's a um. So in other words, it's not Well, I don't know. This is confusing.
I think this is a very compressed recap of some things from his ethics section. He even says intellectual virtues, which you have spoken of above, question 57. This is exactly what we talked about in our Partially Examined Life episode on this, that reason controls, uh, right? Virtue is all about reason. And what is virtue? But it is a disposition. So it's a power for us to act rightly. It is a power that is habitual, that is trained by good schooling. And of course, we consider particular actions. You know, the way we recognize that you would have this potential or disposition is because it gets realized sometimes. So it's actually the virtuous acts are sort of the primordial, or at least the epistemically primary way that we recognize the other two.
The idea seems to be here that law um, can't pertain to reason because reason is being conceived of here as a virtue,
Yep.
or as a faculty of the human mind, which is not always active. Law
Yep.
would cease when the act of reasoning ceases. So there's got to be the law can't just depend on human consciousness in this way.
Yeah. Law is supposed to be
Um,
something eternal, consistent. It is dictating down. It is not merely the reasoning process or the virtue that is exhibited in somebody's actions or and habits. All right,
all right,
objection
let's
three.
look at
Or yeah,
let's look at the reply. It's just like two sentences,
yeah,
I
of
think.
course.
Um, just as in external action, we may consider the work and the work done, for instance, the work of laws, according to what even the jurists no wait
No, the work of building in the house
sorry
built. You got to move to page three. We
yeah um okay, this is longer than I thought. All right, well, it's not that long. For instance, the work of building and the house built. So in the acts of reason we may consider the act of reason, that is to understand and to reason, and something produced by this act. With regard to the speculative reason, this is first of all the definition. Secondly, the proposition. Thirdly, the syllogism or argument. These are, I guess, the products of reason. And since also the practical reason makes use of a syllogism in respect of the work to be done, as stated above, and since the philosopher teaches, hence, we find in the practical reason something that holds the same position in regard to operations as in the speculative intellect, the proposition holds in regard to the conclusions. Such like universal propositions of the practical intellect are directed to actions have the nature of law. And these propositions are sometimes under our actual consideration, while sometimes they are retained in the reason by means of habit. So, in other words, whether or not we are thinking about them or are habitually inclined to do them, there are objective laws of what we should do. And that's what it sounds like here to me. and um, there are principles that hold, right, and such that we can insert them into syllogisms and so forth. It sounds almost like a Kantian maxim here, right? That's what Kant would say. The sort of what corresponds to the scientific law is a in the ethical domain is like a maxim, and we can um, use it almost syllogistically to figure out how we should act.
So even in the use of human reason, we do see this metaphysically stable. I don't know about eternal, but something external. In the acts of reason, we may consider the act itself of reason to understand and to reason, and something produced by this act. With regard to speculative reason, this is first of all the definition, the secondly of the property. Okay, yeah. So there are these uh, mathematical, logical, reasoning underpinnings to anything that we do, and in that way, we are evincing reason when we act. Is that
Well, speculative reason, right? So science, theoretical, scientific reasoning, mathematical as well. But we, when we reason, we produce something. It sounds like to me like we produce definitions, we produce propositions, we produce syllogisms. So the activity of reasoning gives us all these products. Um, and the same thing happens in practical reason. So reason can issue laws. Um, there's an analogy between practical reason and speculative intellect, as he says. Um, so the universal propositions of the practical intellect that are directed actions have the nature of law. Let's think about this for a second. Because if we, if we define, we could give our definition of the rabbit and then come up with some universal, if we're doing science and discover some universal things about it, uh, we're not in that same mode of discovery when we're doing ethics. As Kant would say, we're pulling the laws out of our ass. That's part of the problem here, I think. We can't just go out and discover the laws in the same way. We're issuing the laws to ourselves, and for Kant, it has something to do with avoiding contradiction, right? But how are these ethicists going to do it? I guess they're going to go along with Aristotle, and the full analogy is right. It's teleological, so there is something about the rabbit where we can say, what ought the rabbit to be doing? Okay, not for rabbits, but for human beings at least. There's something about human beings where we can examine them and their structure and the way they are, and say, oh, it's not. We can't. Yes, we can generalize and say they all have hearts and this and that, but we can also generalize and say they all ought to do such and such.
I think we can do that for rabbits. If the rabbit is just lying there listlessly, we
Yeah.
say it ought not to be doing that. Not that we scold it because it doesn't have the faculties of reason to make a decision about this, but that was the seemed to be the key to Aristotelian ethics, is that it is tied in our nature as human beings. And so if somebody is not acting morally, then they're defective in some way. And the defect could mean that they're missing some information, or that they are calibrated wrongly so that they are responding only to their animal appetites and not to more highfalutin ideals. So it is not a matter of, well, I guess you would have to do a little work to say Kantian ethics is actually compatible with Aristotelian ethics, because what it is for Aristotle to listen to reason is to engage in something like the Kantian giving yourself maxims. Aristotle certainly doesn't say that, but I like the idea that these might fit together. I mean, they both certainly like reason.
Yeah, I think as we said in our Hume episode, um, the idea of constitution kind of enters into virtue ethics and into Hume and into Kant, right? The Constitution in Kant, that's at issue, is our constitution as willing, rational beings. Um, it gets very minimalistic in Kant. The Constitution at issue in Hume is the moral sentiments, right? And in Aristotle, maybe it's some sort of mixture. But so yeah, so the Constitution is always at stake. How we are structured.
Are we on to
Um,
objection three? Or are we see we have not been
yeah.
giving Scotus's commentary
Well, we
on the
did.
replies to the objections. Uh,
We already did a Scotus's commentary and objection to.
yes, but then he has commentary on the replies as well. So this is
Yeah, I think maybe because those are long, so
yeah.
why don't we come to those after?
Okay, so let's deal with objection three here. Further, the law moves those who are subject to it to act aright, but but it belongs properly to the will to move to act, as is evident from what has been said above. Therefore, law pertains not to the reason, but to the will, according to the words of the jurist. Uh, I don't know who this is. De Const, who is the jurist? Whoever pleaseth the sovereign has force of law, is a quote from someone.
Whatsoever.
Whatsoever pleaseth the sovereign has the force of law. Okay.
Yeah, so we get a kind of command theory here. Hobbesian, right?
Yep.
So law is conceived of as something that has to issue from some authoritative forcing activity. And so it becomes confusing how reasons could perform that role. And this is what in our Korsgaard episode. This is part of the problem, and she gives a kind of synthetic point of view where you have something that's authoritative, but also reasons are there at work as well. Um, Reflective endorsement. Uh, but so yeah, the objection seems to say reasons can't be forcing in the proper way.
Right. It's only the will
Yeah,
that is
and
the
we
mechanism of
we
action.
we see this in Hume too when he's worried about he's saying reasons can't really properly motivate. We need sentiments. Only sentiments can perform that forcing role. Um, the reason can get involved, but not unless sentiment is there as well. What in the end, if we're going to be motivated to action, there's got to be something non-rational putting us into motion.
It's is this does that interpretation make the final sentence here, this quote, whatsoever pleases the sovereign has force of law, not make any sense? Because if we're saying the law pertains to the will needs to be determined not just by the fact that it is reasonable to perform this, but that there are the appropriate sentiments, appropriate habits, and things set up. That seems like a completely different topic than
I
this
think it
divine
may just
command
be
theory.
a metaphor, like the will is like the
Mm-hmm.
sovereign. Um, so
Okay.
just as in a state where what has the force of law, whatever the sovereign says, and the sovereign could be the Constitution, right, or it could be the legislature or whatever. It doesn't have to be a monarch, but it could be a monarch. So yeah, so just as in a state, whatever the sovereign says has the force of law. In us, it's the will that gives things the force of law, and reasons can't do that. So even if I say, well, it would be a good thing for me to do X, um, that doesn't mean I have to, right? This is the whole Korsgaard thing again. What gives it normative force? Just because something would be good for me doesn't mean I have to do it. So then, where does the have to come from? And command theory says it comes from something that's like a sovereign. In this case, the will, and this is part of what Kant's trick was, right? To say it's because we legislate it to ourselves. the will in a way is like the sovereign.
So
What's
let's see. Scotus is, yeah. Go ahead and
yeah.
read what he has to say about this.
From what was said above, by the name of eternal law, we rightly understand the judgment of the divine intellect. This judgment, though participation derived to intellectual natures, through participation derived to intellectual natures, is born as natural law. Therefore, if eternal and natural law pertain to reason, much more must other laws, which are declarations of those laws, be attributed to reason. Other laws, it seems like, might be human positive laws.
Sure. Well, this is
Um,
in accord with what he had said in responding to objection 2 that was about
yeah,
the laws that are to be kept in the republic. So he really is going to give us a less subtle, more recognizably theological, divine command theory. This is not just a metaphor. This is literally what happens. Is God uh, has judgments, the judgment of the divine intellect. Through participation, this is derived to intellectual natures, right? To use reason is to understand what the divine intellect wants of us, and that is natural law. So just like for Hobbes, or I don't know if he's the best example. Maybe Locke is a better example, but by natural law, we ought to be generally respectful of each other, and have something like the harm principle. Right, Hobbes is definitely not going to say that. That doesn't mean that we do that, but insofar as we are moral beings, then we will pay attention to that, and we will enact God's will.
yeah. So Scotus is bringing it into the political domain more obviously. Um, we didn't really read all of objection 3.
Oh, didn't we not get to the? Oh, you're right. There's 2 more paragraphs of it, of what Aquinas has to say. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so let's just
this
read
is
the
back
next.
to
Yeah.
Aquinas.
On the on the contrary, it belongs to the law to command and to forbid, but it belongs to reason to command, as stated above. Therefore, law is something pertaining to reason. Um, now
I
I'm
thought the point
confused.
of these objections was to say laws not pertain to reason.
Yeah. What's over? Yeah, we're on the right page. So maybe he's moved. Okay, that's the okay. I get it. That was the end of objection 3, and now he's moving into his reply.
Oh, okay. So it's
It's
just
just
not
not
labeled here.
labeled as that in the text. Okay. Wow, this is such a confusing presentation, this format.
All right. So
Um,
here's his the 2 paragraphs that are between his stating the objections and the replies that we've already started to read. All right. So yes,
yeah,
read for us the unambiguous presentation of Aquinas's view.
yeah. Okay. On the contrary, it belongs to the law to command and to forbid, but it belongs to reason to command, as stated above. Therefore, law is something pertaining to reason. I answer that law is a rule and measure of acts whereby man is induced to act or is restrained from acting. For lex, law, is derived from ligare, to bind, because it binds one to act. Now, the rule and measure of human acts is the reason, which is the first principle of human acts, as is evident from what has been stated above. Since it belongs to the reason to direct to the end, which is the first principle in all matters of action, according to the philosopher. Um, now that which is the okay, according to the philosopher. Now that which is the principle in any genus is the rule and measure of that genus. For instance, unity in the genus of numbers, and the first movement in the genus of movements. Consequently, it follows that law is something pertaining to reason. The first movement in the genus of movements I would take to be,
The unmoved
well, it wouldn't
mover.
be God, because God would be the unmoved mover.
Okay. Well, the the
The act
movement
of
that God
creation.
creates, then
Yeah.
the demiurge or whatever.
Well, maybe, yeah. the act of creation itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or well, I don't know.
Well, we've seen this before, right? All this is only really making what little sense it makes to me because we've read about the ethics. And so he was saying, like, a moral act is one that is properly proportioned to its object. It is, there's some agreement in reason about it. So, although then we concluded our discussion of moral action by saying, the most moral acts might be something that where we try to do something greater, something that's out of proportion. So if I'm trying to just go about my day, the sort of general object that is in proportion to what I am capable of is something that is about me sized, right? Me as agent. But if I want to actually do something to serve God or fellow man, then that's something bigger than me. So it's something sort of out of proportion, and we needed a special effort by the will to come in. But there was, in general, when you're doing right, I'm making an arch. I'm an architect making an arch. Well, then my what I create should be in proportion to the job that it's getting done. Right. This is just bringing up his practical reason example before, that there's reason determines how I should design the arch by the physics involved and what kind of roof I'm trying to hold up with this arch or whatever.
Yeah, we could almost read this paragraph backwards and say, okay, we start with the genus of something, and then we can get a principle from that.
Mm-hmm.
And the principle is what directs it to its proper end. There's a proper end built into it, just like with the arch holding something up or something. The roof was an example, right? Um, was
And
that
he
in
refers to
Aquinas, the roof
the
example?
Aristotle's physics, right? It belongs to reason to direct to the end, which is the first principle in all matters of action, according to the philosopher in physics.
Yeah. And then, so once we have that, right, the reason is, I guess what connects us to those principles. The rule and measure of human acts is the reason.
Yeah,
So when we have a reason to do something, it's because it's our end, essentially. And that gives us a law. So the law is something that commands us. What he's really trying to do here, right? The whole work being done here is to be able to say that the law, that reason can be a commanding thing, right? That reason has the force of a command, can have the force of a command. It's not just right. So, oh, that's the rational thing to do, or oh, that's good. Well, why does that have any force? It
it
has
belongs
force because yeah. Go ahead.
it belongs to reason to direct to the end. So he's talking about final causation, and this is what makes it so weird for us, because we think about natural law as describing, in science, as describing what Aristotle would call efficient causation. That uh, whereas this is the ultimate pointing at an end. So it is, I think, maybe a fundamentally weird way to think about. It's retaining this ancient take on science that uh, the law of gravity means that in some sense it is the proper end, it is the reasonable end, it is the desire of the rock to fall.
Yeah. We have this problem that rocks have to fall, but we don't have to do the right thing. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have to do the reasonable thing. So the force analogy falls apart, and that's why this problem comes up over and over again. So we're forced, but we're not forced because we can do the wrong thing. So in what sense are we forced? That's the dilemma. And here he just wants to say that with reason we can be sensitive to ends, and those can have the force of a law that
Yep.
that in some sense forces us. I mean, I don't think it really fully gets rid of the dilemma and the problem, but he wants to be able to say, yeah, we are our reason is what gives us access to understanding what the law is for us based on our what our ends are, which, as I said, is related to how we're constituted as human beings.
So
The
just to
laws are
try to
different for rabbits. Yeah, go ahead.
try to recap the free will stuff. So I thought it was, again, we like to use the example of it is rational for me to not eat the cake because it is my overall goal to have health, but I have this desire, and it is in some sense reasonable for me to eat the cake in that, this can become, so it's a matter for Aquinas of which one of these do we focus on. And that's sort of, we have the people might have different capacities to focus on the higher, more abstract delayed gratification solution, or they might just be animals that will just go right for the cake, as your dog will. But even your dog might be like, you could train your dog to like put the treat in front of them and like, don't eat it yet, don't eat it yet. So you might be able to, and that's essentially what reason is giving us. A view of what the right thing of the delayed gratification thing, that we then it's not like we choose to focus on one or the other. It's still a deterministic, but at least there are multiple choices. There are multiple options for action, and yeah, I don't. Can you
Yeah.
complete the account there? Because it's difficult for me to say it in a deterministic thing, in a deterministic framework, right? Because it does seem like, well, whether the animal is dominating you that day is whether you will eat the cake or not.
Yeah, I'm associating Korsgaard into her saying, right, desire is a reason, that and pleasure and pain,
Yep.
they're the most fundamental reasons. Um and then the question is, well, what kind of creature are we, or do we want to be, right? We could be the wanton, I think is what she calls it, right? So if pain and pleasure just become our law and nothing else is our law, then that's a way of inhabiting a certain kind of identity, right? The rabbit doesn't really have, the rabbit is the rat. That's its identity. The rabbit with being a rabbit and having certain kind of rabbit laws associated with it. With human beings, in a way, we can step into different identities that have different laws associated with them. And there is this is on Korsgaard's account. One of those identities is just being a wanton or a libertine of some sort, where we just do what's pleasurable.
Yep.
But qua human in the fullest sense, qua
Yes.
rational or whatever, then something else becomes the law to us, and that it would be something to do with what's good for us. Um, I
So
think.
I'm noting that having read this, now the reply to objection one that we already read, but which is below this on the page, since law is a kind of rule and measure, it would have been very helpful to have read this. So I think this is an argument for actually reading the text in the order is presented, even though that you have to then look back to the objection when you get to the reply to remind yourself what it's about.
I mean, I would even read the middle section before everything else.
Sure, yeah,
That
because
to
you
me
want to
is
see
the proper or the
what his
proper order.
actual. We can certainly try that. Well,
Yeah. And that's the
let's
way the guy who did the introduction to the text we
yes.
used for our PL episodes recommended that. So you do the middle part, then you do the objections, then you do the replies. But yeah.
I see that if the point is just to get what is Aquinas's actual view, and if he was writing like a normal person, he would just state that up front and then consider objections. Uh, but if you want to just kind of muse about the question, I think the objections are a fine way to start.
Yeah, that's
Like,
true. That's true. It's just it is confusing, and it's fine for us to be confused. And that's part of the point, is for us to be confused out loud. That should be the name of the podcast. Confused out loud. Um, but yeah, all right. That
so we had
do we want to
gotten,
look at any Scotus here?
yeah, we had done the three objections, and we started on. So we read the Scotus's comment on objection three, uh, judgment to the divine intellect, blah blah blah, and then he has his On the contrary, law moves those who are subject to the law rightly, but moving to act properly pertains to the will. Therefore, it belongs to the will to pass laws according to what the jurist says. What has pleased the prince has the force of law. So actually, that's the second paragraph about objection 3. Is just confusing that he says, on the contrary. Oh no, I answer that. Okay, so here's the new part. I answer that it is said here in the sentence that law is something of reason. For the rule and measure of human acts is reason, since it is proper to reason itself to order things to the end, which is the first principle in things to be done. It doesn't seem like there's anything new here.
Mm.
But in any genus whatsoever, what is the principle is equally the measure and rule of that genus, as unity is in the case of numbers. So he's just trying to give, he's trying to make it a little more understandable. Law, therefore, ought to pertain to reason. It seems to us that law is rather an act of will informed by prudence on the presupposition of a practical pointing out by reason. I like that. Fine. And then there's a declaration with a bunch of references. Law, lex, is just, okay, so he's going to continue to repeat. If law that is lex, is derived from binding, ligando, he alone can restrict others through legitimate authority to obeying his just mandates, who can give commands and prescriptions to those who are bound to obey him. Otherwise, he would be passing laws in vain if he could not compel observance to them. It belongs to the same power and virtue, then, to pass laws and to give commands. But to command is an act of will, its object having been shown to it in advance and not of reason. Although reason shows practically what needs to have been done, nevertheless, rational appetite is able, by its innate power of domination over itself, to follow reason's dictates, or by choosing other or opposed things to contemn them, as was declared above. Therefore, the making of laws and the binding of subjects to them by legitimate authority will equally belong to the will. Should we stop there for the moment?
Sure.
So this seems like a more straightforward presentation of I think what we were unpacking. That a more traditional, right? I had said he's a voluntarist. He's so he doesn't have to come up with this weird determinist view whereby, whether you choose the cake or the delayed gratification of not having the cake is some sort of deterministic matter. You just choose. To command is an act of will, its object having been shown to it in advance and not of reason. So reason is showing you here the delayed gratification. This is the best thing, but you are just choosing, right? Or is this undermined by what Scotus is saying, that if a deity or anybody were to pass laws that he has no way to enforce, then he would be passing them in vain?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the laws. There's got to be something in them that compels. So, and again, this is just the problem of normativity, where you can say, and you can create a general principle that such and such is the end, or such and such is good for us. But where's the oomph in that? Where's the push? Because I could just not do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, that's what they're trying to say. There's something about reason which can detect the oomph in the law. It's not just sensitive to, hey, this is be nice if we all did this because that's our end. That's the way we're structured in general. Or it would be good, or it would be healthy, or this or that. It's that we get plugged into something compulsive, something that compels. Reason is a conduit for that, I think. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yes. I'm still really torn, as if to determine, is Scotus actually presenting something different,
I don't think
substantially
so,
different
but
in the way that I was saying? I was characterizing that no, he's a voluntarist. He's all about actual free will, whereas Aquinas is all about this kind of compatibilism. Um, Therefore, the making of laws and the binding of subjects to them by legitimate authority will equally belong to the will. So the binding is the thing that I'm trying to understand, right? He's saying law lex is derived from ligando, binding, but is the binding efficient causation, or is it just saying you are obliged? Or is it obligation?
it's obligation, yeah. Ligando, but yeah, it's obligation, right? So the efficient cause compulsion and is with objects and their natural laws. Um, but the in this case, this is what I've been calling the oomph, right? The binding quality,
Mm-hmm.
but it's normative. So we have to follow it, but we don't have to follow it.
It just
And I
when
think
we
they want
read
to. Yeah, go ahead.
the Aquinas version of that, so higher on the page, law is I answer that law is a rule and measure of acts whereby man is induced to act or is restrained from acting. So that sounds like efficient causation. You're actually induced. Law is derived from ligare, binding, because it binds one to act. So it actually forces you. It doesn't merely give you
Well,
sufficient reason
but we
to
don't.
then.
But we can disobey the law, right? So it's not deterministically forcing. And we have to keep in mind that we can always, when we talk about inducement, we can always look at it from the first person point of view or the third person point of view. So when
Mm-hmm.
reasons induce us, it's from that first person point of view. And then if we look at it from the third person point of view, it just becomes about causality. So we have to, the way reasons induce us is that we recognize the reasons as reasons. It involves us being conscious of them as such. And we can choose to act contrary to, we can see that we have reasons to do something, but do something different anyway.
So for Aristotle, though, for Aquinas, though, if you take a third person position and you look at somebody who is very reasonable, very ethical, is not drunk, sees what the good is the delayed gratification, not the eating of the cake, and they simply do that, do we as third persons, we can say that deterministically came out of their character,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't say, well, he could have chosen otherwise. Like it's not
Right.
necessary that he could have chosen otherwise. So it's only in the first person point of view that it seems like we have another choice.
Right. Which would be enough for us to have another choice, despite the third person point of view, according to people like Korsgaard and certain
Sure.
kinds of compatibilism.
I don't see in Aquinas himself this distinction between first person and third person point of view that
Yeah, but I
I
don't think he understands that we can disobey the law.
mm-hmm.
That's my main point here. And so it's not forcing to us in the same way from that perspective that it would be to natural objects.
Just continuing, obviously we're toward the end of this. Next, is this where we are? Next intellectual. This is back to Scotus. Next intellectual virtue says what is true or not true, whether it be practical or theoretical. But law bids to act, to work towards what has prescribed, but does not incline one to making an announcement that one must thus act. Law, therefore, does not belong to intellectual virtue, but rather to the appetitive. So this seems to follow from what we know about Aquinas about about virtue, right? You need the appetitive involved. Uh, yeah, okay. So that's his commentary on.
Well,
Well, what do you think?
that's confusing to me Because I thought the whole point of this was to say that we could be motivated and compelled without the appetite getting involved.
Well, we can be
Right? We have to do something regardless of whether we want to.
we can be normatively compelled without the appetite be involved, but we cannot be motivated without the appetite get involved. Right?
Does not incline. Right. Right. Does not incline. Well, okay. I'm
I mean,
still
this is
confused
this
by
is
that, but
very weird
that's
in
yeah.
Scotus because it seems like Scotus has been moving toward a definitely normative, even positive view of law. You know, like a king passing laws and God passing laws. Uh, but if we say that the law has to, you know, we and he said, or at least Aquinas has said, somebody has said here that the way that that works is that the intellect, reason recognizes that this is what God's command is, this is what your telos is, and so you do that. But here it
Mhm.
seems like he's expanding law to talk about natural law more fully, which involves the biological, even in human beings.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's up to. I'm confused so far, but
So, so the his reply, we didn't look at his reply. So Aquinas' reply to objection 3, I think we read this. Reason has its power of moving the will, for it is
no,
due
we
to the
didn't read
fact
it
that,
yet.
oh, we didn't read that.
Yeah.
We read it. Did we read objection 3? We did, yes. The objection 3, law moves those who are subject to it to act right, but it belongs to the will to move to act right, right? Whoever pleads this is sovereign had the force of law. On the contrary, it belongs to the law to command for and for forbid, but it belongs to reason to command. Therefore, law is something pertaining to reason. And this was confusing because we were trying to figure out is he answer is are we is this a reply? Is this continuation of the objection? In any case, Aquinas' reply to objection 3, reason has its power of moving the will, as stated above, for it is due to the fact that one wills the end that reason issues its commands as regards things ordained to the end. But in order that the volition of what is commanded may have the nature of law, it needs to be in accord with some rule of reason. In this sense, it is to be understood the saying that the will of the sovereign has the force of law, otherwise the sovereign's will would savor of lawlessness rather than of law. So it's not divine command theory. Sorry, that was my
Yeah,
addition. It's not.
I think command. I wasn't. I misused that term, command theory. What I meant to
I
say
mean, it
is
sure sounded like it.
voluntarism, um, right? The Hobbesian point of view, where
Yeah,
the 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 authoritativeness of the norm comes from the sovereign and the ability of the sovereign to enforce it. Um, and that's what. So the the will of the sovereign has the force of law. Otherwise, it would savor of lawlessness.
yeah,
Um, but let's go farther back up. One will due to the fact that one wills the end. Okay, reason has its power of moving from the will, for it is due to the fact that one wills the end that the reason issues its commands as regard things ordained to the end. So that's interesting.
that is very strange because we usually think it's the opposite. That reason says, "Hey, this is the end," and the will says, "Okay," and the will does that. But this is saying it is due that one wills the end that reason issues its commands as regards things ordained to the end. As if will is
Yeah, now
bringing reason into.
this sounds very Kantian, right?
Yeah, it sure does.
Boy, man, this is quite complicated. I mean, I think we've learned. So this is what as we come to the end here, this is why I had a more positive response to Aquinas. I think, like Seth. did, because I think it's thinking about all these intricate issues. Not that it's always easy to understand, but it's really getting down into the meat of things.
All right. I was all ready to not do a second one of these, but now I'm actually very curious as to what Scotus has in this giant 2-paragraph commentary on the reply to objection 3. And then it would be nice to at least get to this second question, whether the law is always something directed to the common good, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah,
we're not
let's
talking
do
about
that.
ethics.
Let's do one more.
Yep, yep.
I don't. I think it's not like quite. It's a little bit unsuited to this format just because of all the jumping around.
Yep.
That's
Yeah. Hopefully,
like,
people have been able to follow this, and you can just
yeah.
go get the PDF if you want to follow along. To hear that part 2, just to remind folks, that'll only be available to Close Reads supporters. So that's patreon.com/closereadsphilosophy. We hope you have enjoyed this the public one, the one with the video. If you're not looking at it, the video looks pretty terrible today. I've been out of focus. You're zooming. It's not great.
I'm getting a new webcam for the 200 people, or if it's even that much, who do this, like, want to see us on video.
Anyway,
webcam.
Folks can, yeah, if you're just seeing this on YouTube or something, you might want to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, so you could get the ad-free version that's available on Spotify and elsewhere, actually, just by going and following us at patreon.com/closereadsphilosophy. You don't have to pay any money to get all these free versions. But if you're looking up through just Apple Podcasts or whatever, then you're getting the one through closereadsphilosophy.com, which will have a bunch of ads in it. So that's not as good. Anyway, thanks. Bye.
Bye.